icyo mvuze nuko kuba nanyuze hano nagarutse uyu munsi mu gihugu nyuma y'imyaka 16 ari amahano yarabaye muri iki gihugu. Tuzi neza ko habaye itsembabwoko hakabitsembatsemba. Ntabwo rero nari kugaruka nyuma y'imyaka 16 mu gihugu cyabayemo ibikorwa nk'ibyo mu gihe ntari mpari ngo njyame sinzire ntabanje kunyura aho ibyo bintu byabereye ngo mbanze mparebe hasuri. Indabyo nazanye n'urwibutso abarwanashyaka bayifudeye inkingi ndetse n'ubuyobozi bwayo bwa politike bwampaye bumbwira buti uhanyure ubwira abanyarwanda ko icyo twifuza nuko dufatanya gukora hamwe tugakora ku buryo amahano nk'ayo y'amaraso atazongera kuba. Nimwe tifuza ko amahano nk'ayo yongera kuba mu gihugu, nimwe no mu mpamvu yatumye FD inkingi dufata icyemezo cyo kugaruka mu gihugu mu mahoro tutagombye gukoresha intwaro nk'uko benshi batekereza ko umuti w'ibibazo ari ugufata intwaro. Kuko ntabwo twemera ko kumena amaraso ariko kurangiza ibibazo. Iyo umuntu amenya amaraso aranamuhama. Ntabwo rero FDI icyo twifuza nuko abanyarwanda dufatanya hamwe mu bitekerezo binyuranye dufite ariko tugakora ku buryo amahano yagwiriye igihugu cyacu atazongera kubaho. Biragaragara ko inzira y'ubwiyunge ikiri ndende. Iracyari ndende kandi koko urebye abantu bishwe muri iki gihugu ntabwo ari ikintu cyahita kirangira ko kanya. Nanone niyo urebye usanga nta ngamba ya politike ihari ifatika yo gufasha abanyarwanda kugera ku bwiyunge. Kuko nk'ubu hano turareba kuri uru rwibutso ruragarukira mu by'ukuri ku bantu bahitanywe n'itsembatsemba no kwitsembabwoko ry'abatutsi. Haracyari uruhare rundi rw'itsembatsemba ryakorewe abahutu kuko nabo barababaye abantu babo bishwe nabo baravuga bati mbese ibyacu byo bizagerwaho kugira ngo rero tuzagere ku nzira y'ubwiyunge nuko ako kababaro ka buri wese tukumva. Ni ngombwa ko abatutsi biciwe abahutu babishe babyumva kandi bemera ko bagomba kubihanirwa. Ni ngombwa ko abantu baba barishe abahutu nabo bumva ko nabo bagomba kubihanirwa. Kandi ni ngombwa ko abanyarwanda mu moko yacu tuvamo anyuranye kumva ko tugomba gufatanyiriza hamwe mu bumwe mu bwubahane tukubaka igihugu cyacu mu mahoro. Ikituzanye rero no kugira ngo dushake uburyo dufatanyiriza hamwe gutangira iyo nzira y'ubwiyunge, dufatanyiriza hamwe gushaka uburyo akarengane gacika mu gihugu cyacu, gufatanyiriza hamwe gushaka uburyo abanyarwanda twese tubaho mu bwisanzure mu gihugu cyacu. Murakoze.
This is INGABIRE Victoire Umuhoza, the woman who stood at Rwanda's most sacred place of remembrance and asked a question no one in power wanted to hear. A question about memory, about justice, about who is allowed to be mourned, and who is forgotten. In Rwanda, some truths are celebrated, some are silenced, and for daring to speak the silenced truth, Ingabire paid the highest price. She was arrested, condemned, and locked away. Years later, she is once again behind bars, a prisoner of her words and her courage. So who is she? Why does her voice frighten the most powerful men in Rwanda? And what does her story tell us about freedom and fear in one of Africa's most praised nations? This is the Rwandan Vigilante. And today we ask, what is really happening to Rwanda's leading opposition figure? Ingabire Victoire Umuhoza was born in 1968 in what was then Byumba province, in a Rwanda where ethnicity defined life and death, opportunity and exile. By the early 1990s, the country was at war. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, a rebel group mostly made up of Tutsi exiles, launched attacks from Uganda to overthrow the then Hutu-led government. It was a brutal civil war. In April 1994, the president's plane was shot down, an event that triggered one of the darkest chapters in human history, the genocide against the Tutsi. Hundreds of thousands were killed in 100 days of horror. Many families, including Ingabire's, fled the violence and the chaos that followed. She found refuge in the Netherlands, where she built a life far from the hills of Rwanda. She got an education, raised a family, and carved out a small but determined political space within the Rwandan diaspora. But Ingabire was not content to stay quiet in safety. She watched her homeland rebuild under the iron grip of Paul Kagame and the RPF. She watched Rwanda gain praise as Africa's miracle, safe streets, fast growth, low corruption. But she also heard the whispers, opposition leaders disappearing, journalists found dead or forced into exile, elections won by margins too perfect to trust. She became one of the few in the diaspora who dared to challenge Kagame's rule. She wrote statements, gave interviews, and demanded space for all victims of violence to be acknowledged, including the Hutu civilians killed in reprisal attacks as the RPF took control. Ingabire's supporters say she never called for violence, she called for truth, and for opening Rwanda's political space to real competition. But to the RPF, her message was dangerous. Rwanda's official line is that anyone who questions its version of history is a threat to unity, and unity, they argue, is what keeps Rwanda from sliding back into chaos. In January 2010, she made a choice that would define her forever. She packed her bags, left her family in Europe, and returned home. Her goal? To run for president against Kagame in the upcoming election. Her arrival at Kigali International Airport was quiet but shocking for Rwanda's political elite. A woman returning from exile, with the clear intention to stand on a ballot line against the president, was nearly unthinkable. For her supporters, it was a spark of hope. Maybe Rwanda's democracy was more than a slogan after all. But within days, the moment that would seal her fate came at the Kigali Genocide Memorial at Gisozi. Standing before the cameras, she asked why there were no memorials for innocent Hutu killed in revenge attacks. It was a question that echoed far beyond the stone walls of the memorial site. To the government it was poison, fueling divisionism, the same dangerous ideology they say sparked genocide in the first place. Months later, she was arrested. The charges, collaborating with the FDLR, a rebel group in Congo made up partly of ex-genocidaires, inciting division, denying genocide. She denied them all. But Rwanda's courts are not known for defying the state's wishes. Human rights observers called her trial a show, where evidence was weak and witnesses were coerced. Her sentence 15 years behind bars. The message to anyone else who might dream of running for president against Kagame, loud and clear. Life in prison was harsh. For years she was held in Kigali's 1930 prison, a colonial-era fortress notorious for overcrowding and political prisoners. She spent long periods in solitary confinement. Family visits were heavily monitored. Supporters who tried to see her were harassed or detained themselves. Yet from her cell, she continued to send messages of resilience. International groups, from Amnesty to the European Parliament, campaigned for her release, calling her a prisoner of conscience. Still, the years dragged on. In 2018, under growing international scrutiny, Kagame issued a presidential pardon. INGABIRE was freed, along with more than 2,000 other prisoners, some high-profile, many lesser known. The move was sold to the world as a sign of Rwanda's maturity and mercy, but INGABIRE's freedom was never full. She was barred from leaving Rwanda. Her new political party, Dalfa Umurinzi, a name meaning development and liberty for all, was denied registration again and again. When she held press conferences or spoke to journalists, police would hover nearby. Her family faced intimidation. Her closest supporters were watched or summoned for questioning. Still, she refused to flee. She stayed. Her soft, measured voice, urging peaceful change, was a quiet defiance in a country where the loudest sound is often silence. She spoke about political prisoners, about laws that crush dissent, about Rwanda's need for true pluralism. And every time she spoke, she reminded the world that Rwanda's democracy is still more promise than practice. But in June 2025, the story took a dark turn once more. INGABIRE was arrested again, this time accused of creating a criminal network, inciting unrest and threatening national security. The accusations link her to 9 Dalfa Umurinzi members and journalist Theoneste Nsengimana, a well-known voice who has covered opposition politics despite harassment for years. Her lawyers say the new charges are an excuse, a recycled script Rwanda's government uses to frame critics as criminals and silence them through endless detention. Outside Rwanda, the arrests triggered outrage. Protesters gathered in Brussels, London, Toronto, waving placards calling for her release. Inside Rwanda, the state-controlled media labeled the accused as dangerous plotters, a threat to the peace Kagame's regime claims to protect. INGABIRE's bail hearing is set for July 15, 2025. Many believe she will not walk free. But the cost of her courage is not only hers to bear, it's a signal to every Rwandan who still dreams of open debate: beware. Yet her story keeps moving. Her words, though censored at home, cross borders online. Her voice, though silenced by prison walls, echoes in the streets where protesters chant her name. This is the struggle for Rwanda's future. Not just skyscrapers and conferences, but whether truth can be spoken without fear. So what is really happening to Rwanda's leading opposition figure? The truth is brutally simple. She is paying the price for asking the wrong question in the wrong place, and refusing to stay silent when power demanded she vanish. She is being punished, not for what she did, but for what she represents. The idea that Rwanda belongs to all its people, not just the few who hold power. She reminds us that democracy is not glass towers and clean streets alone. It is the right to speak, to question, to remember, even the parts that power once forgotten. INGABIRE Victoire Umuhoza's story is not over. It lives in every protest sign abroad, in every whispered conversation at home, in every person who dares to ask, who decides which victims are mourned, and which are erased, who decides who speaks, and who disappears. This is the Rwandan Vigilante. Share her story, speak her name, because silence only protects the powerful.